Great Scott! Who would have thought that there was a hidden movie in the original Back to the Future film? A movie with a paradox that could unravel the entire space time continuum. Pretty heavy, huh? Well, that's the topic on this episode of the Remake Challenge.
No! No!
I know. The idea of remaking Back to the Future is cinematic blasphemy. It's my favorite movie of all time, and while this story does conform to my remake challenge rules, I consider this more of an extension of the original story than a straight up remake. So, with those rules in place, let's turn on the flux capacitor and set the time circuits for the decades between 1955 and 1985. Hit it. The first act of any movie establishes the characters and setting, and in this story, the main character is Doc, and the setting takes place after Marty goes back to the future in 1955. Doc, the story's main protagonist, gets blamed for the lightning strike on the clock tower. After all, he's the one who was conducting a weather experiment the night of that terrible thunderstorm. After that, he is shunned from Hill Valley and starts developing a reputation that pays off in 1985.
This so-called Dr. Brown is dangerous. He's a real nutcase. You hang around with him, you're going to end up in big trouble.
During this time, though, George and Lorraine's lives start taking off in better ways than they ever did before. George is a celebrated author. UC Berkeley offers him a tenure-track position to teach literature, and he starts seriously considering taking up that offer and leaving Hill Valley. And that causes the problem. The second act of a movie happens in the middle, and that is when the main thread of a story emerges. In this story, time is beginning to break down. Rips in the space-time continuum start forming all around Hill Valley. For example, Lone Pines Farm, a tourist attraction for UFO enthusiasts, suddenly becomes Twin Pines Farm, and all the damage inflicted by the DeLorean reverses itself, as if the DeLorean were never there. These tears in the space-time continuum have ripple effects on some of the characters. For example, Biff Tannen spontaneously reverts to his older bully self with no memory of Marty McFly or Calvin Klein or anything, and he starts picking on George McFly in earnest. During this time, Doc investigates these rips in space-time continuum while developing the first version of his time circuits. Meanwhile, George and Lorraine realize there's something unusual about Marty. George picks up on all the pop cultural references that he made in the 1950s, which are now coming to fruition in the 60s. During their conversations, Lorraine brings up how it was strange that Marty, or Calvin Klein, hung around Doc Brown, the crazy scientist who's currently trying to invent a time machine. And all of this comes together in the third act. The third act is the last third of a movie, and that is the resolution. It explains how the characters are going to solve the central conflict. In this third act, George, Lorraine, and Doc Brown come together and discover the problem with the space-time continuum. Marty's job at repairing the timeline and having his parents fall in love established a new causality loop in time. George and Lorraine's better lives are the direct result of their son who traveled back in time. But if George and Lorraine's lives stray too far from the original timeline, their son won't be able to travel back in time to make their lives better. And that's how the universe explodes. The three main characters resolve to close the causality loop and save the universe by doing everything they can to ensure Marty is able to travel back in time with Doc Brown in 1985. The character who sacrifices the most is naturally George. He has to turn down that tenure position at UC Berkeley to preserve the timeline. Therefore, he resolves to get into his writing in earnest, and that's how he's able to live a lot better at the working class home he had in the original timeline. Also, George does get a hero moment by standing up to Biff one final time to defend himself. The story ends with two major scenes. The first involved George and Lorraine seeing Marty setting fire to the living room rug as it was foretold in 1955. The final scene of the movie involves Doc talking to Honest Joe Statler about buying a car for his time machine. Statler is really gung-ho about a Ford Mustang. It's sleek, it's stylish, it's got everything, it's fully loaded. Doc takes a moment to think about this offer and then turns him down. After hanging up the phone, Doc turns to the taped letter that Marty gave him the night he went back to the future. Final lines of the movie? What the hell? But what do you think? Does this story expand the Back to the Future universe? What other movies would you like to see get the remake challenge? Let me know in the comments below. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to try to buy a DeLorean. Class dismissed. Hope you enjoyed that video. Many thanks to the students who helped make this video possible. And if you enjoyed this video and haven't already, please subscribe and share this video with other people who might enjoy it. I'd absolutely love to see Sci-Fi High School grow in numbers. With that said, till next time.